When was the first time that you heard of Frank Porto?
The first time I heard of Frank Porto, he was still living in his parents' basement in Fairhaven. A house which I now believe has been raided by the INS and the Department of Homeland Security about a half a dozen times.
Man, well, I first met Frank Porto at Cafe 9 in New Haven, where all, the great musicians hang.
Green M&Ms was my first experience with Frank Porto, and I could trace the whole time I've known him back to this green M&M. First grade. So when was the first time you heard of Frank Porto?
First time I heard my heart fully skip a beat.
He wasn't even on the bill to play with the other players. In fact, he just cockily grabbed someone's guitar, waltzed up on stage and started performing, and he blew my mind.
Some people thought that Frank was a great musician, and other people thought that Frank was a great poet. I thought he was neither. I thought he was a bullshit artist. A bullshit artist, I tell you.
Frank's a goddamn American hero.
He blew everybody away. That night, I almost begged Frank to get to know him, and we were fighting to get to him, and I remember I got hit a few times. I hit a few other people.
Yeah, I got hit by some fucking bald guy right in the head.
That was the first time I remember hanging out and meeting Frank, and then wanting, of course, to be with him as much as possible.
I was a little kid, young, impressionable. Matt and Frank were in 4th grade. The big kids on the bus I looked up to.
There are people who still think Nicoll Street was some kind of, special magical artist's commune. What it really was two slackers who laid around on a couple of couches 24 hours a day and wondered why nothing was happening in their lives.
They sat me down, they looked me in the eye, and they said, "Richie, green M&Ms get girls horny." Come to find out, they don't.
It was just this bohemian pad with candles and incense and women and partying and drinking. And
people talk about Nicoll Street again like it was some kind of, fantasy refuge for the, criminally artistic. Nothing ever happened there. Nothing. There were no orgies. There were very few women.
Although in Frank's defense, we did have one orgy on Nicoll Street. We just made sure not to invite Mr. Potatohead.
All these women that would be all over Frank, it was like one hottie after the next, kissing him, fighting to be with him. It was ridiculous. And, all the other guys in Nicoll Street had nothing. They couldn't do anything.
Barely any drugs. Alright, there was probably a fair amount of drinking. You can tell that by the way the two of them got fat with each other. But other than that, there was very little about Nicoll Street which was very interesting or exciting. Very little.
Hottie with the red hair, hottie with the black hair, hottie with the blonde hair. It just kept going. And I think there was even a few black girls and Mid-Eastern. He had it. German. He had everything. Frank had truly everything.
Their whole lives, Matt and Frank had to fight the stigma or the perception that they were gay. So in order to successfully combat this, what did? They lived together and never once spoke to a woman. Yes, that's exactly how you convince everybody that you like women, by living with your best friend in a slovenly pit and never speak to another woman. Yes, that was brilliant.
I could kind of see how no women wanted to be anywhere near them or their apartment. They had so many pubes on the bathroom floor you could knit a fucking sweater.
Like everyone's painting and these people are making out in the corner, and of course like 6, 7 girls are all over Frank.
Nothing ever happened there. Nothing.
It was just decadence, that place. It was absolute decadence. It was crazy. It was like living in the 60s, But yeah, it was probably the 90s at the time. That's what I remember.
Frank was supposed to be the good one. Frank was an idiot. He decorated the apartment entirely in cinder block furniture.
Yeah, there were lots and lots of cinder block piled on top of cinder block bookshelves, which I thought was strange.
And his own bedroom with used traffic signs. You want to talk about arrested development? Thank God he got married. Gave him a chance to grow up.
a musician playing out at nights. He's hanging with so many women. I don't know how he finds time for himself, but yet he was able to keep the place immaculate. I mean, I thought the guy had a maid or something.
You had to see the way this place was decorated. It was truly some post-adolescent wet dream right out of a David Lynch thing. It looked exactly like Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. There were these deep red walls, deep red colors all through the apartment.
Immaculate. The silverware in perfect order. The dishes all stacked beautiful, and oh my God, vacuumed rugs all the time. Truly amazing.
And of course, you know, both of them were allergic to sunlight, so the blinds and the curtains were always drawn, so it was dark and depressing and gloomy. You half expected a midget speaking gibberish to come up to you and ask you some question that you couldn't understand what was going on. Of course, that midget might have been Matt, but I'm not entirely sure.
Why was I so knocked out, and how did 2 futons change my life? And honestly, Frank, to think that you had 2 futons, I only had one.
I had no futons. I had a Salvation Army couch.
2 futons is an inconsequential piece of music. It's the story about 2 guys sitting on 2 futons. Oh man, how fucking boring is that?
What influenced me to get a recording studio and, you know, all my guitars and keyboards and drums and become a songwriter? Well, I wish I could say it was always in me or it came from some other source, but it came from Frank.
2 futons is an inconsequential piece of self-referential masturbatory music.
And it totally blew me away, the concept of having 2 futons.
They spent so much time on those couches, they actually wrote music about it, and then everybody got all hot and bothered over the music. It was ridiculous. Matt DiGennaro spent so much time on one of those couches that he actually started to smell like the couch, and even worse, the couch started to smell like him. It was horrible. You'd sit down on the couch and, oh God, it's Matt.
I'm not trying to infringe on any copyrights or anything, but you so influenced me with 2 futons.
2 futons.
It's almost unlistenable. The only reason people like it is because they know it's about Matt and Frank are ridiculous people. It's a ridiculous song for ridiculous people.
I hope you enjoy my version of your song, 2 futons. You're sitting there, I'm sitting there, you're sitting there, I'm sitting here. 2 futons!
I think I'm sitting here and I think you're sitting there. 2 futons.
I'm sitting here, you're sitting there. Fuck you. You know, the gift basket for this gig was really poor. And where's my check? Make sure Manny, my agent, gets my check. I don't do this kind of shit for free.
Not motivated to get 2 futons. I didn't have to get 2 futons because all I had to do was walk down the street and there was Matt and Frank's 2 futons.